I'm Emily, a 25-year-old woman who has somehow become the unofficial, unpaid family babysitter during every holiday gathering. Let me explain. I have an older sister, Sarah, who is 33, and her husband, Mike, who's 34. They have 2 kids, Ava, who is 6, and Ethan, who is 4. Now, let me just say up front that I adore my niece and nephew. They're cute, funny, and sweet, in small doses. But for some reason, ever since Ava was a toddler, Sarah and Mike decided that I was the perfect person to handle their kids during family events. It started off innocently enough. Sarah would ask if I could play with Ava while she caught up with the adults. I didn't mind at first. I mean, it's family, right? And Ava was a cute little baby who didn't need much attention besides being held or entertained with a toy. But over the years, it evolved into something much bigger. By the time Ethan came along, it was no longer a polite request, it was just expected. Every holiday gathering, whether it was Thanksgiving, Christmas, or even smaller get-togethers like 4th of July, I would somehow find myself in charge of the kids. And when I say, in charge, I mean it. Sarah and Mike would hand them off to me, and then they'd disappear into the adult conversation zone, laughing, drinking wine, and enjoying their time. Meanwhile, I'd be chasing a hyperactive 4-year-old and trying to keep a 6-year-old entertained, usually in some separate room or corner of the house. This has been going on for years now, and honestly, it's not even about the kids. It's about the expectation. No one ever asks if I'm okay with it. No one offers to take over for a while. It's just assumed that because I'm young, single, and childless, I have no reason to want to enjoy the holidays the way everyone else does. It's like they see my time and presence as less valuable because I don't have kids of my own. This year, I decided I was done. Thanksgiving rolled around, and as usual, the whole family gathered at my parents' house. Sarah and Mike arrived with Ava and Ethan, who were already bouncing off the walls with excitement. I braced myself, knowing what was coming. Sure enough, as we all sat down to eat, Sarah casually announced, "After dinner, Aunt Emily can watch the kids while the adults have some wine and catch up." I felt my stomach drop. This was the moment I had been dreading but also preparing for. I took a deep breath and said, as politely as I could, "Actually, I prefer to spend time with everyone this year. Maybe we could all take turns watching them instead." The room went silent. You know that kind of silence where you can feel the tension creeping in? That's exactly what it was. Sarah looked at me like I had just slapped her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice dripping with disbelief. "You're so good with them. They adore you." I nodded and said, "I know, and I love spending time with them. But every year, I end up missing out on family time because I'm the one taking care of the kids. I'd like to enjoy the holiday with everyone this time." Before Sarah could respond, Mike chimed in with what might be one of the most infuriating things I've ever heard. He said, "It's not like you have kids of your own, so what's the big deal?" I couldn't believe it. I looked at him and said, "The big deal is that I'm part of this family too, and I'd like to enjoy the holiday just like everyone else. I'm happy to help out, but it shouldn't always fall on me." That's when my mom decided to weigh in. She gave me that classic disappointed mom look and said, "Emily, it's just what family does. You're young, you'll have plenty of time to enjoy yourself later. Right now, it's about helping out where you're needed." The guilt tripping was intense. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, and for a second, I started to doubt myself. But then I remembered all the years I had spent running after Ava and Ethan while the rest of them laughed and sipped wine in the other room. I remembered how I would come home from these gatherings exhausted and feeling like I hadn't even been part of the celebration. So I stood my ground. "I get that family helps each other out," I said, "but it's not fair for one person to always take on the responsibility. I think it's reasonable to ask that we take turns." Sarah was livid. She said I was being selfish and ruining the holiday for everyone. Mike nodded in agreement, and my mom looked like I had just told her I didn't believe in family values. So now I'm left wondering, was I wrong? Should I have just sucked it up and watched the kids like always? Update 1. Fast forward to Christmas Eve, and you could already feel the lingering tension from Thanksgiving hanging over the house like a dark cloud. My parents were hosting again, which was our family's usual tradition. The house was warm and inviting, with the scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon wafting through the air. The tree was glowing with colorful lights, presents were neatly piled underneath, and holiday music played softly in the background. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But beneath the festive cheer, I knew we were all walking on eggshells. Sarah and Mike arrived later than usual, which wasn't like them. They're usually punctual, but this time, they came in looking a bit flustered. Sarah gave me a tight-lipped smile, and Mike barely acknowledged me. Ava and Ethan ran in excitedly, clutching their little bags of toys, and I braced myself for what I knew was coming. Sure enough, as everyone settled into small talk and drinks before dinner, Sarah started dropping her not-so-subtle hints. She made little comments about how the kids always love spending time with their favorite aunt, and how it's nice to have someone they're so comfortable with. I could feel my mom glancing at me, probably hoping I'd cave and make everything easier for everyone. But I didn't budge. I politely reminded Sarah about our conversation at Thanksgiving and suggested that she and Mike come up with a plan that didn't involve me. Sarah just rolled her eyes, muttering something about how I was making a big deal out of nothing. I ignored her and kept chatting with my dad, who gave me a small, approving nod. Dinner came and went without much drama, though Sarah kept giving me these icy side glances every time Ava or Ethan tried to climb into my lap. I'd gently redirect them toward their parents, who seemed more annoyed by their own kids than anything else. It was clear Sarah and Mike hadn't planned for this, probably assuming I'd cave at the last minute and take over like I always had in the past. But I didn't. After dinner, the family gathered in the living room for a game of charades, which is something we've done every Christmas Eve for as long as I can remember. Everyone was in good spirits, laughing and joking as we divided into teams. For a moment, it felt like maybe we could all just enjoy the evening together without any drama. But of course, that didn't last long. As soon as we were about to start, Sarah announced loudly, "It's time for the kids to go play with Aunt Emily." It wasn't even phrased as a question or a request. It was a statement, as if she had decided for me. Ava and Ethan perked up, looking at me expectantly, and I could feel the entire room watching to see what I would do. I took a deep breath, smiled at the kids, and gently said, "Not tonight, sweethearts. Why don't you ask your mom or dad to play with you?" The kids pouted, but they turned to Sarah and Mike, who looked absolutely livid. Sarah's face turned red, and she let out this exasperated sigh like I was the most unreasonable person on the planet. She stood up, grabbed Ava and Ethan by their hands, and loudly declared, "Well, I guess we'll just leave since Emily doesn't care about family anymore." Her voice was dripping with venom, and you could practically hear a pin drop in the room. Everyone froze, unsure of what to say or do. Even my mom, who had been firmly on Sarah's side up until this point, looked uncomfortable. My dad, however, didn't hesitate. He looked right at Sarah and said in a calm but firm voice, "Sarah, Emily has a right to enjoy her holiday, too. If you can't handle your kids for one evening, maybe you should consider hiring a sitter." It was like a bomb went off. Sarah's jaw dropped, and she looked at my dad like he had just betrayed her. Mike muttered something under his breath, but it was clear he wasn't about to argue with my dad. Sarah gathered her things, practically dragging Ava and Ethan out the door, and stormed out without saying goodbye to anyone. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone seemed to be processing what had just happened, and I could feel a mix of emotions swirling around the room. Part of me felt vindicated, my dad had stood up for me, and Sarah's dramatic exit only highlighted how unreasonable her expectations were. But another part of me felt guilty. This wasn't how I wanted the evening to go. I didn't want to ruin Christmas or drive a wedge further into the family. I just wanted to be treated fairly. My mom was the first to speak. She let out a heavy sigh and said, "Well, that was unfortunate." She looked at me, her expression unreadable, and then went to the kitchen to start cleaning up. My dad gave me a reassuring pat on the back and said, "You did the right thing, Emily. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." The rest of the evening was quieter than usual. We finished the game of charades, but the mood wasn't the same. I could tell everyone was thinking about Sarah and what had happened. My mom was clearly upset, though she didn't say much. My dad tried to keep things light, but even he seemed a little shaken by the confrontation. Since then, Sarah hasn't spoken to me. She didn't even text me on Christmas Day, which is unheard of for her. Normally, she's the type to send out mass, "Merry Christmas" messages first thing in the morning. Instead, I got radio silence. My mom has been acting distant too, though she hasn't outright said anything. My dad, on the other hand, has been incredibly supportive, checking in on me and reassuring me that I'm not in the wrong. Update 2. A few days after Christmas, I was still trying to process everything that had happened. Then, out of the blue, I got a call from my cousin, Jess. Jess is 28, a little older than me, and someone I've always gotten along with but wouldn't say I'm particularly close to. We exchange pleasantries at family gatherings and occasionally chat online, but we're not the type to call each other just to catch up. So when her name popped up on my phone, I was immediately curious, and a little apprehensive. She wasted no time getting to the point. Jess told me she'd been thinking a lot about what happened on Christmas Eve and felt like she needed to come clean about something. What she said completely floored me. Apparently, Sarah and Mike have been asking Jess to babysit Ava and Ethan other events, like date nights, parties with Mike's friends, and even the occasional work function. But here's the kicker, they pay her. Jess explained that she didn't know I wasn't being compensated for all the times I've looked after the kids until the Thanksgiving blow-up. She had just assumed Sarah and Mike treated me the same way they treated her. When she realized I'd been doing it for free all these years, she felt horrible and thought I deserved to know the truth. Hearing this was like a punch to the gut. All these years, I'd been guilt-tripped into watching the kids under the guise of family helping family, while Jess, who isn't even as close to Sarah as I am, had been getting paid. I wasn't mad at Jess. In fact, I appreciated her honesty. But the sheer unfairness of it all made my blood boil. They had no problem shelling out money to Jess, but when it came to me, it was just assumed that I owed them my time and energy because I'm the aunt. I stewed on it for a while before deciding I needed to confront Sarah. This wasn't something I could let slide. I called her later that day, and the conversation went about as well as you'd expect. Sarah didn't even try to deny it. She confirmed what Jess had told me without a hint of shame and doubled down on her reasoning. Jess isn't family, so of course we pay her. You're their aunt. It's different. It was like she couldn't even comprehend why I would find this upsetting. To her, it made perfect sense that I should give up my time for free while Jess got paid. After all, I'm family. But to me, it felt like a slap in the face. I had spent years bending over backward to accommodate Sarah and Mike's expectations, sacrificing my own enjoyment of family gatherings to take care of their kids, and not once did they think to compensate me, or even ask if I was okay with it. They just assumed I would do it because I'm the aunt. I told Sarah that if she expected me to babysit in the future, she could either pay me like she does Jess or find someone else. Her reaction was predictable. She accused me of being money-hungry, and said I was putting a price tag on family relationships. Then she hung up on me. After the call, I sat there staring at my phone, feeling a strange mix of anger and sadness. The entitlement was staggering. Sarah genuinely believed that I owed her my time simply because of our familial connection, and the fact that I had dared to challenge that narrative made me the bad guy in her eyes. I wasn't being money-hungry. I didn't even want their money. I just wanted to be treated with the same respect they showed Jess. The fact that they valued Jess's time enough to pay her but saw mine as a free resource spoke volumes about how they viewed me. Now, I'm at a crossroads. Part of me wants to stop going to family events altogether. What's the point if I'm just going to be treated like the family doormat? But another part of me feels like that would be letting Sarah win. Why should I miss out on spending time with the rest of my family because she can't handle being called out on her entitlement? It's a tough call, and I don't know what the right answer is. To make matters worse, my mom has been acting weird ever since Christmas. She hasn't directly said anything about what happened, but she keeps making passive-aggressive comments about how family is supposed to stick together, and it's sad when people lose sight of what really matters. I know she's trying to guilt me into smoothing things over with Sarah, but honestly, I'm not sure I can. This isn't just about one holiday or one argument. It's about years of being taken advantage of and dismissed. My dad, bless him, has been my rock through all of this. He told me he's proud of me for standing up for myself and that I shouldn't let anyone make me feel guilty for wanting to be treated fairly. He even offered to have a talk with Sarah himself, but I told him not to bother. If Sarah can't understand why her behavior is wrong, then I doubt anything he says will make a difference. As for Jess, I'm grateful that she told me the truth, but it's also opened up a whole new can of worms. I can't help but wonder if there are other family dynamics at play that I've been blind to. Have I been the only one putting in more than I'm getting out? Or is this just a Sarah and Mike problem? Either way, it's left me feeling disillusioned about the whole idea of family. Right now, I'm leaning toward taking a step back from family events, at least for a while. Maybe some distance will help me figure out what I want and how to navigate this mess. All I know is that I'm done being the unpaid babysitter, and I'm done letting Sarah guilt-trip me into sacrificing my own happiness for hers. Family or not, my time and energy are valuable, and I deserve to be treated with respect. Update 3. It had been weeks of strained silence between Sarah and me after our blowout over Christmas. I hadn't heard much from her aside from a few passive-aggressive comments she'd made to my mom, which, of course, got relayed to me in the form of thinly veiled guilt trips. My mom was still walking the line between trying to keep the peace and subtly nudging me to reach out first. I wasn't going to budge. For once, I felt like I had drawn a firm boundary, and I wasn't about to let it crumble just to appease someone else. Then one Saturday morning, completely out of the blue, Sarah showed up at my apartment. I was still in my pajamas, sipping coffee and half watching some random show when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find her standing there with Ava and Ethan in tow. She looked tired, more tired than I'd ever seen her. Her makeup-free face showed dark circles under her eyes, and her usual composed demeanor was replaced with something softer, almost defeated. The kids were unusually quiet, holding on to Sarah's hands instead of bursting in with their usual energy. I wasn't sure what to make of it. I stepped aside to let them in, more out of habit than anything else, and before I could even ask what was going on, Sarah blurted out an apology. It wasn't some half-hearted, sorry you feel that way, kind of apology, either. It was real, raw, and honest. She admitted she'd been taking me for granted for years. She said she hadn't realized how much she was relying on me until I finally pushed back, and that it made her reevaluate how she and Mike had been handling things. She told me that she and Mike had been feeling overwhelmed trying to balance parenting with having any semblance of a social life. She said they didn't know how to ask for help in a way that didn't feel like they were burdening others, so they just defaulted to me because I was family and always there. It wasn't right, and she acknowledged that. For the first time, I felt like she really saw me, not just as Aunt Emily, but as a person with my own life and limits. Then came the bombshell. Sarah confessed that she and Mike had been dealing with financial struggles for a while. Apparently, Mike had secretly taken out a loan without telling her, and it had spiraled into a massive fight when she found out. She said they'd been barely scraping by, which was why they couldn't always afford to pay Jess but still wanted a break during the holidays. It all made sense now, the desperation, the entitlement, the guilt-tripping. They'd been drowning and didn't know how to handle it. She told me they were in couples counseling now, trying to work through not just their financial issues but also their communication problems. Sarah said she wanted to be honest with me because she realized how unfair it had been to dump their problems on me without ever explaining what was going on behind the scenes. I appreciated her apology, but I knew I couldn't just let everything go without addressing the bigger issue. I told her that while I was sympathetic to her situation, I still needed boundaries. I wasn't comfortable being the default babysitter anymore, especially not without being asked or included in the decision. I told her that family or not, my time was valuable, and it needed to be respected. To my surprise, she agreed without any pushback. She said she understood and promised to do better. Then came the surprising part. Sarah asked if I would be willing to help out occasionally, on a paid basis, while they worked through their issues in counseling and tried to get back on their feet financially. She emphasized that it would only be when I was free and willing, and I could say no without any hard feelings. I could tell how hard it was for her to ask, but it felt different this time. It wasn't an expectation, it was a request. After thinking it over, I agreed. I told her I'd help out occasionally, but only on my terms. If I didn't feel up to it or had other plans, that was the end of the discussion. She said she understood, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were on the same page. Over the next few weeks, things slowly started to shift. My dad and I had a long talk about how unfair the dynamic had been, and he promised to back me up if it ever happened again. My mom, who had initially been on Sarah's side, eventually came around. She admitted they'd all been putting too much pressure on me and said she was proud of me for standing up for myself. It was a small victory, but it felt huge to finally have my parents acknowledge what I'd been dealing with. Then came the next family gathering, a big dinner at my parents' house a few weeks later. I'll admit, I was nervous walking in. I wasn't sure what to expect from Sarah and Mike, but they greeted me warmly, and for once, there were no passive-aggressive comments or side glances. The biggest surprise came after dinner, when Sarah announced that she and Mike had hired a professional babysitter for the evening. My jaw nearly hit the floor. For the first time in years, I got to enjoy a family gathering as just Emily. Not Aunt Emily, the free babysitter. Just Emily. I played charades, laughed with my cousins, and even got to have an uninterrupted conversation with my dad. It was everything I'd been wanting for so long, and it felt incredible. As I left that night, Sarah pulled me aside and thanked me again for being patient with her. She said the counseling was helping and that she and Mike were working hard to be better, not just as parents but as partners and family members. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about our relationship. It's still a work in progress, but things feel different now. Healthier. More balanced. And the best part? I know that if I ever feel overwhelmed or taken advantage of again, I have the tools, and the support, to speak up. Victory never tasted so sweet.